Picture this, a man, lean, tattooed, completely fearless, straps on a wetsuit and dives into the open Pacific Ocean. He's not running from something, he's swimming toward it. And it is a Megalodon, a 75-foot prehistoric shark that was supposed to have been extinct for 3.5 million years. And this man, he pulls out a knife. That's the Meg in a nutshell, and it's glorious. Released in August of 2018, the Meg arrived at a peculiar moment in Hollywood history. The summer blockbuster season had grown increasingly reliant on shared universes, sequels, and familiar IP. Audiences were sophisticated. They'd seen everything. So when a studio announced it was making a $130 million movie about a colossal prehistoric shark versus Jason Statham, the response was somewhere between cautious curiosity and gleeful disbelief. Could it be done? Could you actually make that premise work without it collapsing into self-parody? The answer, somewhat surprisingly, was yes. Not only did the Meg work, it cleared $530 million at the worldwide box office. It launched a franchise, and it remains, to this day, one of the most weirdly effective creature features of the modern blockbuster era. Director Jon Turteltaub came to this project with an unusual resume. He'd built his reputation on the National Treasure franchise, crowd pleasers with a wink and an adventurous spirit, not known for visceral tension or prehistoric carnage. But that sensibility turned out to be exactly right for the Meg. He understood how to keep things moving. He knew when to let the spectacle breathe and when to pull back and let character moments land. He brought a kind of confident, unhurried showmanship to a genre that often mistakes frenetic pacing for actual excitement. The property itself had been circling Hollywood for the better part of 20 years. Steve Alten published the source novel Meg, a novel of deep terror, in 1997, a pulpy, breathless adventure about a megalodon surviving in the depths of the Mariana Trench. The rights got picked up. Jan de Bont was attached to direct. Guillermo del Toro was circling as a producer. The budget climbed, the studio got cold feet, and the whole thing collapsed. The rights reverted. Development hell. For over 2 decades, the Megalodon refused to stay dead, which, in retrospect, feels like the universe sending a very clear signal about what kind of movie this was always going to be. When it finally got made, the Meg had become something none of those earlier versions could have been, a genuine US-China co-production. Not just a movie that added a few Chinese characters for market optics, but a film that was structurally, logistically, and narratively built to serve 2 major theatrical audiences simultaneously. The Chinese research facility, the Chinese scientists as full participants in the story, the Sanya beachfront climax. These weren't afterthoughts, they were the architecture. And that decision, commercial as it unquestionably was, gave the Meg a texture that sets it apart from most of its genre contemporaries. But honestly, you don't think about any of that when the movie opens. The opening sequence drops you into the dark, a submarine rescue mission in the Philippine Trench 5 years before the main story. Jonas Taylor, played with maximum Statham intensity, is in the water, doing what he does best, pulling survivors out of a disabled vessel. And then something starts ramming the hull, something massive, something that shouldn't exist. Jonas has to make the kind of call that ends careers, cut the damage section loose, let 2 people die, save the ones he can still save. He does it. He gets the remaining crew out. He surfaces with blood on his hands and a story that nobody, not the Navy, not his colleagues, not the official inquiry, is willing to believe. 7 minutes in, and the Meg has already told you everything you need to know, not about the shark, about Jonas Taylor, his guilt, his credibility problem. The specific flavor of loneliness that comes with knowing you were right and having no way to prove it. Cut to 5 years later, and the movie shifts gears entirely. We're above the ocean now, at Mana 1. A sleek, futuristic research facility floating above the Mariana Trench. Part corporate showcase, part genuine scientific operation, run by Dr. Koth, Minwei Zhang and his oceanographer daughter, Suyin. There's a billionaire investor on his way. Jack Morris, played by Rainn Wilson in full-tech bro villain mode, the kind of guy who quotes ROI figures while scientists risk their lives. And there's a mission already in progress, a submersible dive to explore a thermocline of hydrogen sulfide beneath the trench floor, a chemical layer that has been blocking sonar readings for years. Here's the thing about that setup. It's actually clever. The Mariana Trench is already the most hostile environment on Earth, nearly 7 miles of crushing darkness that we've barely begun to map. So when the film suggests there's an entire hidden ecosystem below the part we can reach, it doesn't require much suspension of disbelief. The unknown is genuinely unknown down there. What else could be living in the dark? What else could have survived in a sealed environment, cut off from the upper ocean for millions of years? The answer lands almost immediately after the submersible breaches the thermocline. A living, thriving, deep ocean ecosystem, lit from within by bioluminescent life. Beautiful, alien, vast. And then the communications go dark. The submersible is disabled. 3 people are trapped at the bottom of the world, including Jonas Taylor's ex-wife. And there's only one person who's ever been that deep and come back. What's remarkable about how the Meg builds this first act is how efficiently it does it. Nothing feels rushed, but nothing overstays its welcome either. The exposition is worn lightly. The character beats arrive naturally. By the time Mac and Doctoral Jong track Jonas down to that Thai bar where he's been marinating in self-imposed exile, you understand exactly why he left and exactly why he'll go back. The reluctant hero arc is one of cinema's oldest devices, but Statham sells it because he never plays Jonas as a man waiting to be persuaded. He plays him as a man who genuinely believes he's out, and discovers, quietly, that he isn't. That's the world of The Meg. Expensive science meets human arrogance, the ocean as mystery, a creature that shouldn't exist, and a man who was right about something terrible and paid for it with 5 years of his life. None of this requires you to take it completely seriously. The Meg knows what it is. It's a creature feature with a massive budget and a leading man who exudes the specific energy of someone who punches sharks for fun. But knowing what you are and committing to it, really committing, without irony, without hedging, is genuinely hard to do. Most films in this space either lean too hard into the camp or try too desperately to be something more. The Meg finds that third path, earnest entertainment made with skill and clarity of purpose. The shark hasn't fully emerged yet. The underwater ecosystem is still largely unexplored. The cast of likable, doomed in various ways characters is still getting established. But the machinery is in motion, the stakes are set, and somewhere deep below the surface of the Pacific, something very old and very large is about to remind the world that the apex predator title was never actually ours to claim. We've been warned. We just didn't listen. Picture a man alone in the deep ocean. No backup, no plan B. Just a wetsuit, a diving knife, and the kind of jaw-set determination that most people reserve for slightly inconvenient things, like a traffic jam or a stubborn jar lid. Now picture what he's swimming toward. Not away from, toward, a shadow. A 75-foot shadow, moving through water so black it looks like outer space. A creature that your entire civilization agreed had been extinct for 3.5 million years, and this man pulls out his knife. That's the Meg. And from the moment it commits to that image, fully, unironically, without a single wink at the audience, you understand exactly what kind of movie you're watching. Not a parody, not a self-aware horror comedy, not a disaster. A creature feature that actually believes in itself, and that, more than anything else, is why it works. August 2018. The summer blockbuster season was winding down, and Hollywood was deep in a pattern it had been running for years: sequels, franchises, shared universes. Safe bets dressed up as spectacle. Into that environment walked a $130 million movie about a prehistoric mega shark versus Jason Statham, a pitch so brazenly, beautifully simple that it felt almost rebellious. Studios had spent a decade convincing audiences that bigger meant more complicated, that scale required mythology, that you needed 4 movies of setup before the good stuff happened. The Meg just showed up. Big shark. Big man. Open ocean. Let's go. The film was directed by John Turteltaub, a filmmaker whose name you might not immediately associate with prehistoric marine carnage. His signature films were the National Treasure movies, crowd-pleasing adventures built on momentum, humor, and a genuine affection for their own ridiculousness. That sounds like faint praise, but it isn't. The ability to keep an audience enjoying themselves for 2 hours is harder than it looks. Turteltaub has it. He doesn't linger when he should cut. He doesn't rush through character moments to get to the spectacle. He knows the difference between tension and noise, and in a genre that mistakes the two constantly, that knowledge is worth its weight in gold. What's fascinating about the Meg getting made at all is how close it came, repeatedly, to never existing. The source material, Steve Alten's 1997 novel Meg, a novel of deep terror, had been circling Hollywood for over 2 decades. Jan de Bont got attached to direct in the late 90s. The budget spiraled. The studio balked. Rights reverted. Development hell swallowed the project whole and kept it there for years. At various points, names like Guillermo del Toro drifted through the conversation. What kept the property alive wasn't studio enthusiasm. It was the novel's fan base and the stubbornly appealing core concept, a Megalodon, the largest predatory shark in Earth's history, alive and hunting in the modern world. The version that finally got made in 2018 was shaped by something none of those earlier versions could have been. It was built from the ground up as a U.S.-China co-production, a genuine creative and commercial partnership between Warner Brothers and Chinese production company Gravity Pictures. And this wasn't the superficial version of that deal you sometimes see, where a Hollywood film tacks on a Chinese character for 2 scenes and calls it collaboration. The Meg integrated its Chinese identity into the actual bones of the story. The research facility at the center of the plot is jointly operated. The scientists are Chinese. The final beach sequence takes place at Sanya, China. And the film's ensemble gives its Chinese characters agency, intelligence, and, crucially, the same survival odds as everyone else. This mattered commercially. The Meg cleared $530 million worldwide, and a substantial portion of that came from Chinese box office. But it also mattered artistically, even if the film doesn't wear its ambition loudly. The result is a movie that feels genuinely international in a way that most American blockbusters don't. And in 2018, at a moment when global filmmaking was becoming the dominant force in studio economics, the Meg was paying attention. But again, you don't think about any of that in the opening scene. You think about the dark. You think about the pressure. You think about the sound design, which is doing extraordinary work before a single word is spoken, the creaking of a disabled submarine hull, the muffled horror of a ship breaking apart under tons of water, the silence that shouldn't be possible at that depth but somehow is. Director of photography, Tom Stern, a longtime Clint Eastwood collaborator whose eye for shadow and contrast is immediately recognizable, shoots the Philippine trench sequence with a deliberate claustrophobia that gives the whole prologue a thriller's heartbeat. Jonas Taylor is in that water, leading a rescue operation on a disabled nuclear submarine. People are dying. He's the best there is at this job, which is the only reason he's here, at this depth, in this dark. He gets to the damaged vessel, he starts pulling survivors, and then something starts hitting the hull. Not hitting it, ramming it. Something massive moving in the black, and whatever it is not a whale. Jonas has to make a call, a catastrophic, career-ending call. He can save the people in front of him, or he can wait for the two crew members still trapped in the flooded section and risk losing everyone. He makes the call. He cuts the section loose. 2 people die. The rest survive. He surfaces alone with a truth nobody will accept. Whatever was down there wasn't human error. It wasn't equipment failure. It was something alive, something enormous. And the moment he says that out loud to the official inquiry, his career is over. Not because they think he's lying, because the alternative, that something that large exists in the deep ocean, is a problem nobody at a naval inquiry is equipped to process. 7 minutes into the Meg, and the film has done something genuinely skillful. It's established its protagonist not just as a capable action hero, but as a specific kind of tragic figure. The man who was right and paid for it. The man who made the only call he could make and lost everything anyway. Jason Statham plays these early scenes with a restraint that might surprise you if your only frame of reference for him is Crank or the Fast and Furious franchise. There's a weariness to Jonas that Statham earns without leaning on it too hard. The guilt is present but not performed. He's not a man consumed by what happened. He's a man who accepted it, found a beach bar in Thailand, ordered a drink, and quietly decided he was done. That matters, because the movie's first act only works if you buy the reluctant hero as reluctant. If Jonas feels like someone just waiting for a reason to suit back up, the whole setup collapses. But Statham plays him as genuinely checked out, and when Mac, played by Cliff Curtis, operating at maximum affable warmth, tracks him down in that Sanya bar to ask for help, Jonas doesn't immediately leap to action. He says no. He means it. It takes something specific, something personal, to change the calculus. Cut away from Jonas, and the film opens up into the world of Mana 1. If the prologue is dark and claustrophobic, the research facility is its visual opposite, all clean lines, natural light, and the cool blues of the open Pacific. Mana 1 floats above the Mariana Trench, the deepest point in any ocean on Earth. A nearly 7-mile descent into a world that humanity has barely begun to understand. The facility is funded by a tech billionaire named Jack Morris, played by Rainn Wilson, with the specific energy of someone who has read too many Steve Jobs biographies and not enough books on, say, the consequences of hubris. The science team here is the real heart of the film's ensemble. Dr. Minwei Zhang, the facility's director, operates with the calm authority of someone who has spent decades doing serious work in an unserious world. His daughter Suyin is an oceanographer and diver, played by Li Bingbing, with a grounded competence that the role genuinely earns. There's Jax, the engineer, played by Ruby Rose. There's DJ, the crew's wisecracking tech guy. There's Toshi, whose moment later in the film carries more emotional weight than a creature feature arguably deserves. These characters aren't written as shark food and nothing more. That's the film doing its job. You need to give the audience just enough investment in these people that when the Megalodon arrives, the stakes feel real rather than mechanical, and the discovery that sets everything in motion is genuinely well conceived. The team has been studying the thermocline, a chemical barrier of hydrogen sulfide beneath the trench floor that has been blocking sonar readings for years. Their theory? It's not just a chemical layer, It's a thermal ceiling, and below it, there might be an entirely unexplored ecosystem, sealed off from the upper ocean, maintained by volcanic venting, completely cut off from the world above. When a submersible finally breaches that layer, the sequence is one of the film's most purely beautiful moments. Tom Stern's camera moves through the thermocline slowly, like an eye adjusting to new light, and what the crew finds below is astonishing. A living, bioluminescent deep ocean world, teeming with life that's never been documented, lit from within like something from a fever dream. It's alien. It's gorgeous. And in the context of a movie about a prehistoric shark, it's doing exactly the work it needs to do, making the impossible feel plausible. What could be living down there? What's been sealed in that ecosystem for millions of years, evolving in total isolation, completely beyond our instruments and our imagination? The submersible finds out, and then it goes dark. 3 people are trapped at the bottom of the world. The submersible is disabled. There's nobody alive who's ever gone that deep and come back, except for one person. One person who did it once, lost 2 colleagues, and has spent 5 years on a Thai beach waiting for the world to forget his name. Mac picks up the phone. This is the architecture of the Meg's opening, and what's quietly impressive about it is how clean it is. There's no wasted motion. Every scene does at least 2 things. The prologue establishes Jonas and the creature. The Mono 1 sequences establish the world and the characters and the scientific plausibility of the premise. The billionaire subplot plants its flag early and doesn't overstay its welcome. And the tonal register, urgent but never frantic, serious but never self-important, is locked in from the first frame. Jon Turteltaub understood something that a lot of directors in this genre don't. The monster is only as frightening as the world around it feels real. You can show the audience a 75-foot shark in the first 5 minutes, and they won't feel a thing if they don't care about the people in the water. The Meg earns its scares, and its thrills, and its laughs by doing the unsexy foundational work first, setting up the world, making you like the people in it, building the machine one piece at a time. The Megalodon is out there, below the thermocline, in the dark, in a world that was supposed to be beyond our reach. We found it anyway, because that's what we do. We push deeper, drill further, explore places that were never meant for us. And now, it knows we're here. What happens next is a masterclass in controlled escalation. But before we get there, we need to talk about exactly how this rescue mission unfolds, how the Meg makes its full entrance, and why the moment it finally breaches into the upper ocean is one of the more genuinely thrilling reveals in modern blockbuster cinema. That's Act 1. Let's get into it. The call gets made. And Jonas Taylor, who had every intention of finishing his beer and watching the rest of the afternoon dissolve into nothing, gets on a plane. What's worth slowing down to appreciate here is the why. Not just why Jonas agrees to go back, but why the film takes the time to make that decision feel earned rather than convenient. Lesser action movies skip this part. The hero hears people are in danger and the gear is already on. The Meg doesn't do that. It understands that Jonas's hesitation isn't weakness, it's psychology. He left that world behind for a reason. He made a call that cost 2 people their lives, watched his marriage dissolve in the aftermath, sat through an inquiry that labeled him unstable, and then quietly removed himself from any situation where he might be in that position again. The Thai beach wasn't indulgence, it was self-preservation. So when Mac makes the ask and Jonas says no, that's the honest response. What changes? It isn't duty. It isn't heroism in the abstract. It's one specific piece of information. One of the 3 people trapped in that disabled submersible at the bottom of the Mariana Trench is Lori, his ex-wife, the woman who was there at the inquiry, the woman who knows what it cost him to make that call 5 years ago, the last person in the world Jonas Taylor would walk away from. He finishes the beer. He gets on the plane. The Mono 1 facility, seen fresh through Jonas's eyes when he arrives, does something quietly clever in how it reestablishes the world. Everything we've already learned about this place, the research mission, the ensemble, the billionaire investor, the ambition of the whole operation, gets filtered through Jonas's skepticism. He's not impressed. He's not intimidated. He walks through the most advanced deep-sea research station on the planet like a man doing an unpleasant errand, cataloging problems as he goes. The equipment, the depth rating on the rescue vehicle they're proposing to use, the team's experience at that specific kind of pressure. Rainn Wilson's Morris gets his first real interaction with Jonas here, and the dynamic between them is one of the film's more enjoyable, low-key running threads. Morris is the money. He has the confidence of someone who has never been wrong about anything that couldn't be solved by writing a check. Jonas is the man who has been to the bottom and come back changed by it. They have nothing in common. They don't pretend otherwise. Wilson plays Morris in these scenes with an oily charm that barely conceals the fact that the man's primary concern, at all times, under any circumstances, is his investment. He's not evil, exactly. He's something more contemporary, catastrophically indifferent to anything he can't quantify. Suyin is the other key piece of this dynamic. She and Jonas come from different operational philosophies. She's a scientist who dives, he's a rescue specialist who thinks like a soldier, and the friction between them in these early scenes is the kind of friction that anyone who's ever worked alongside someone with a fundamentally different approach to problem solving will recognize immediately. Neither of them is wrong. They're just calibrated differently. Suyin trusts data. Jonas trusts instinct. And at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, you need both. The actual descent sequence is where the Meg starts paying off its technical investment. The rescue vehicle, a single pilot submersible, deeper rated than anything currently available to the team, goes under, and Tom Stern's camera makes a choice that pays dividends for the next 20 minutes. It stays close. Rather than pulling back to show the vessel against the scale of the trench, which would be visually impressive but emotionally distancing, the film stays inside the cockpit with Jonas. You see the pressure gauges. You hear the hull adjusting. You watch Statham's face, which is doing a tremendous amount of work in these scenes, cycling through calculation and controlled tension and the specific kind of professional focus that keeps a man functional when every biological instinct is screaming at him to reverse course. The descent to the thermocline layer is long enough to feel it. Director Turteltaub understood that one of the genre's most persistent failures is the horror of depth. Most films gesture at it and move on. The Meg sits in it for a moment. The pressure, the dark, the fact that the communication signal degrades into static the further down Jonas goes, until he's operating in genuine silence, alone, making decisions with no one to confirm them. And then he hits the thermocline. Visually, the passage through the hydrogen sulfide layer is one of the film's most elegantly conceived images. The sub moving through what looks like a slow explosion of milk-white fog, chemistry and light refracting in a way that shouldn't be beautiful but absolutely is. Below it, the deep ocean ecosystem that the earlier dive team discovered is waiting, bioluminescent, alien, completely unreachable by any official rescue mission that doesn't know it exists. Jonas finds the disabled submersible, 3 people alive inside, including Lori. He gets to work. Here's the thing about rescue missions in movies: they're hard to make tense when the audience knows the protagonist is going to succeed. Or at least, they're hard to make believably tense. The mechanics of the operation can feel like procedural filler between the parts where monsters attack. The Meg sidesteps this by making the emotional weight of the sequence carry the tension when the physical threat isn't yet visible. Jonas and Lori's first face-to-face through the submersible glass is brief, almost businesslike, but it says everything. There's history there, damage, something that was broken and was never quite fixed. Statham doesn't play it as sentimentality. He plays it as a man who is going to get this particular job done and deal with everything else later. The other survivor who matters here is Toshi. We've known him only briefly, a few scenes on Mana 1, enough to like him, enough to understand that he's one of those people who holds a team together through sheer reliability. What he does during the rescue, and why he does it, will be discussed in full when we get to the character analysis. But the setup pays off hard, and the film earns it by giving him just enough presence in Act 1 to make the cost real. Jonas gets Lori and the surviving crew detached from the disabled sub. He begins the ascent, and that's when the movie shifts registers entirely. Because something followed him through the thermocline. The first full emergence of the Megalodon in the Meg is handled with real restraint, which sounds counterintuitive for a film about the largest shark in history, but turns out to be exactly right. The initial sense of it isn't visual, it's spatial. Something is displacing water on a scale that doesn't match anything. The submersible's instruments are calibrated to process. Then there's a shadow, not under the vehicle but around it, the way a shadow works when the object casting it is enormous enough to block ambient light from multiple angles at once. And then there's the impact. The design of the Megalodon itself is one of the most carefully researched elements of the entire production. Paleontologists know Megalodon existed. The fossil record is clear, primarily from teeth that are genuinely terrifying in person. What they don't know is exactly what the full animal looked like, how it moved, what its coloration was. The VFX team at Sony Pictures Imageworks used great white morphology as a starting point, same basic body plan, same predatory logic, and scaled it up by roughly 3 times in every dimension. What results is an animal that looks plausible in a way that a lot of creature features monsters don't. It doesn't move like CGI trying to look real. It moves like something that spent millions of years becoming very good at exactly one thing. The attack on the ascending rescue vehicle is chaos managed with precision. Turtletub cuts quickly enough to maintain the frenetic energy of something this large, moving this fast, but he never loses spatial geography. You always know where Jonas is relative to the creature, where the surface is relative to Jonas, where the threat is coming from next. That's harder than it looks. Action sequences at this scale tend to become disorienting, spatially incoherent, more impression than story. This one stays legible throughout, which means the audience can experience it rather than just endure it. Jonas gets the survivors to the surface. The Megalodon does not follow them up, not yet. There's a scene in the immediate aftermath of the rescue. Aboard Mana 1, Jonas cleaned up, the medical team working on the survivors. That does something the film gets quiet credit for. Rather than launching immediately into the next beat, it stops. It gives Jonas and Lori a moment alone. It's not a long scene. It's not a dramatic confession or an emotional reckoning. It's two people who have been through something together. The original incident 5 years ago, now this, acknowledging each other with a particular shorthand of a shared history that ended badly and left no clean resolution. She's alive. He made sure of that. The rest of it is complicated, and neither of them has the energy to get into it right now. It's the kind of scene that gets cut from blockbusters and test screenings, dismissed as pacing dead weight. The Meg keeps it in. And because it's there, Jonas's arc has actual connective tissue beneath the action. He's not just a man rescuing strangers, he's a man confronting what he walked away from, and beginning, very slowly, to determine whether walking away was the right choice. Meanwhile, Dr. Jang's team is processing what the encounter data is telling them. The creature is real, the creature is enormous, and the creature, based on tracking data from the disabled submersible's final transmissions, has breached the thermocline layer and entered the upper ocean. The sealed-off deep-sea ecosystem, the one that's been hiding whatever survived down there for millions of years, is no longer sealed. The boundary that kept the deep world separate from ours has been compromised. It's unclear whether Jonas's descent caused it or whether the Meg was already testing the layer, already pressing against the limits of its hidden world. What's clear is the result. A 75-foot apex predator from the Pliocene epoch is now in the Pacific Ocean proper, in open water, with access to every shipping lane, every coastline, and every population center on the Pacific Rim. The research mission is over. The emergency has just become a crisis. Jack Morris, for his part, responds to this information the way you'd expect a man of his particular character to respond, by asking how quickly the situation can be contained before it becomes a PR liability. Jonas, for his part, is already thinking about what you do when you're in the water with something that size. What works? What doesn't? Whether there's any version of this that ends without another impossible call. The shark is out. The thermocline is compromised. The team at Mana 1 has roughly 20 minutes of denial before reality catches up with them. Act 1 is ending. The real movie is about to begin. There's a specific kind of dread that comes with losing something in open water. Not the confined, claustrophobic dread of a dark basement or a locked room. This is wider than that, more absolute. The ocean covers 71% of the Earth's surface, and most of it averages over 2 miles deep. You don't find things in the ocean. You wait for the ocean to show them to you. And in Act 2 of the Meg, the ocean has something very specific. It wants to show the world. The moment the Megalodon clears the thermocline and enters open Pacific water, the film's geometry changes completely. Down in the trench, the threat was bounded, terrifying, but contained within a physical space the characters could at least conceptualize. Up here, there are no walls, no ceiling. The creature can move in any direction at any depth, and the Mana 1 team's sonar, calibrated for standard deep-sea research work rather than tracking a 75-foot apex predator, is about as useful as a flashlight in a hurricane. This is the engine of Act 2, the shift from rescue mission to hunting operation. And it's where the Meg starts demonstrating what separates a well-made creature feature from one that just goes through the motions. The first clear sign that something has changed in the upper ocean comes before the team even has a chance to formulate a plan. A fishing vessel, running standard patterns in waters that have been commercially fished without incident for years, goes silent. The crew of Mana 1 picks up the distress signal, or rather, the absence of one, which is its own kind of distress signal. By the time they get a drone out to the last known coordinates, there's nothing left. A debris field. Fuel spreading on the surface. No survivors. The Meg didn't just damage the vessel, it removed it. This is one of the film's smarter escalation choices. Rather than showing the attack directly, which would spend spectacle too early, it shows the aftermath. The negative space where a boat used to be. This works on 2 levels simultaneously. It establishes the creature's scale through implication rather than demonstration, and it gives the Mana 1 team and the audience a beat of genuine cold recognition before the action fully kicks in. Something this large operating in open water isn't a research problem anymore. It's an extinction-level event for anyone operating on or near the surface of the Pacific. Jack Morris, confronted with this information, has one of the most illuminating reactions in the entire film. His first instinct isn't alarm, it's containment. Keep it quiet. Don't alert shipping companies. Don't notify Coast Guard agencies. Don't do anything that would turn this into a public-facing catastrophe before they've had a chance to manage the narrative. This is played for dark comedy. Wilson's delivery is perfectly calibrated, landing somewhere between absurd and genuinely unsettling. But it's also doing real thematic work. Morris represents a specific failure mode of the billionaire class, the belief that any problem, including a prehistoric mega-predator in international waters, is fundamentally a PR problem first. Jonas's response to that position is brief, profane, and entirely correct. The hunting operation that forms the spine of Act Two brings the ensemble together in a functional unit for the first time, and it's here that the film's character dynamics start operating at full efficiency. Jonas is the operational lead, the person who has actually been in the water with his creature and survived. Suyin brings the scientific understanding of the animal's behavior, its likely hunting patterns, its sensory capabilities. Mac keeps the whole machine running, the kind of operational glue character who doesn't get enough credit in films like this, but is absolutely essential to making the human side of the story feel populated rather than sparse. And DJ, the facility's resident tech expert, provides both the analytical support and a consistent lightness of tone that keeps the tension from curdling into grimness. The whale scene is the sequence that shifts Act Two from tense procedural into full creature feature mode, and it's worth taking a moment to appreciate how precisely it's constructed. The team picks up the Meg on sonar, large but still ambiguous, still potentially mistakable for a natural geological formation or a thermal anomaly, and follows the signal into open water. What they find first is a pod of sperm whales, enormous animals, among the largest predators currently living on Earth, moving together with that particular unhurried grace of creatures that have nothing to fear in their natural environment. And then, one of them isn't moving the right way. The camera descends below the surface, and what you see, shot with a stillness that makes the scale of it register slowly, then all at once is the Meg, moving beneath the whale pod, not attacking, not yet, just present, a shadow with mass, an animal whose dorsal fin, when it finally breaches the surface, is tall enough to be mistaken for a small sail. The effect on the whale pod is immediate and visceral. These animals that have never been prey to anything, responding to something older and larger than their entire evolutionary history, has prepared them for. Tom Stern's camera does something here that deserves specific recognition. It refuses to cut. The reveal of the creature's full scale above the surface plays in a single, uninterrupted take, giving the audience's brain the time it needs to actually process what it's looking at. Quick cuts would have hidden the artificiality of the VFX. This held shot forces you to look. And because the work from Sony Pictures Imageworks is genuinely accomplished, the water displacement is correct, the movement physics are consistent with how that mass would behave. It holds up under examination. The whale sequence ends with Jonas back in the water in ways he would not have chosen, which is a recurring pattern of his Act Two experience. He ends up in situations that require immediate improvisation, operating at the edge of his own capability, making the kind of split-second calls that his psychological history makes uniquely costly. Every time he's in open water with the Meg, there's a layer of what it cost him the last time running just beneath the surface of his focus. Statham plays this not as paralysis, but as pressure. You can see the weight of it in how he moves, how he conserves energy, how he never fully relaxes even when the threat isn't immediately visible. The mid-act sequence that takes place around the research buoy, a network of data collection instruments floating at various depths, connected by cables, is the film's most compact demonstration of spatial filmmaking under pressure. Jonas and Suyin are in separate vehicles, tracking a signal that keeps moving in ways that suggest the Meg is testing the perimeter rather than simply hunting. The tension here isn't pure predator-prey. It's the specific unease of being observed by something more intelligent than the situation should probably allow. Megalodons, as the film presents them, aren't brutes. They're curious. They investigate. They circle. The moment the Meg makes its move on the buoy network is choreographed with the kind of mechanical clarity that makes action sequences actually function as storytelling rather than just spectacle. The creature uses the cable network, designed to collect data, not to interact with anything larger than a deep-sea fish, as a kind of containment architecture, trapping the smaller submersibles in ways that force Jonas and Suyin into proximity they weren't planning on. The coordination required for the escape involves both of them subordinating their very different problem-solving instincts to a single operational reality. There's only one way out, and it requires trusting someone you've been arguing with since they arrived. This is where the Jonas-Suyin relationship does its best work in the film. Not in a big emotional scene, but in a pressure situation where trust is established through action rather than conversation. She follows his lead on the mechanical problem. He follows her read on the creature's behavior. Neither of them says anything particularly meaningful about it. They just do the thing and get out alive. That's more than most blockbusters manage in terms of building a functional partnership between two leads. The attempted kill sequence, the team's first genuine offensive operation against the Meg, is where Act 2 reveals its most interesting structural choice. It fails. Not in a way that costs everyone their lives, but cleanly, unambiguously, in a way that forces the team to recalibrate their entire understanding of what they're dealing with. The poison tip deployment, the tracking, the careful maneuvering, all of it executed with professional competence, and all of it insufficient. Turteltaub holds on the moment of failure long enough to feel it. The creature takes the hit, goes deep, and then nothing. No death roll, no blood cloud, no satisfying resolution. The team sits at the surface in their vessels and waits, and the waiting stretches out past the point where it should be over, past the point where the data should be confirming a kill. It's alive. Of course it's alive. It's been alive for 3.5 million years. What makes this beat land rather than simply frustrate is that it reframes the creature intelligently. The Meg isn't just large. It isn't just dangerous in the way that any large, dangerous thing is dangerous. It's specifically, almost insultingly resilient, a product of evolutionary pressures that make the poison deployment that would stop anything in the current ocean essentially insufficient. The film is making a point that it will return to more directly in the theme section, but which lands here as pure story. We built our entire understanding of the ocean around the things that are currently alive in it. The Meg is older than our frame of reference. It plays by rules we haven't learned yet. Jonas, to his credit, absorbs this without panic. He adjusts. That's what he does. Morris does not absorb it gracefully. The Morris subplot, which has been running in the background of Act 2 as a persistent, low-level irritant, begins applying real pressure at this point. The failed kill attempt gives him leverage. He immediately tries to use. He wants to call in outside help, a mercenary operation with hardware designed for exactly this kind of containment. Jonas's position, that bringing in people who don't know what they're dealing with will cost lives, is correct. Morris's position, that this has gone beyond the team's capability and requires a larger solution, is also not entirely wrong. The film doesn't pretend the conflict is simple. It just makes clear which kind of wrong is more dangerous. Act 2 closes on the sequence that most firmly locks in the Meg's tonal register and earns the second half of the film everything it needs to work. A leisure boat, civilians, children in the water. The Meg, tracked by the team but moving faster than their intercept capability allows, heading directly toward a populated stretch of open ocean that has no idea what's coming. What happens next is the film committing fully to the creature feature promise it has been building toward since the prologue, the moment where the contained scientific emergency becomes a public catastrophe, where the abstract threat becomes something real enough to touch. The sequence is kinetic and genuinely alarming, and shot with a wide-open energy that contrasts everything about the confined underwater work that preceded it. Turteltaub opens the frame, pulls back, shows you the scale of the ocean and the absurd smallness of everything floating on it. People get in the water. They have no idea. The Meg sees them. And suddenly, the clean, controlled hunting operation that Jonas and the Mana 1 team have been running is completely irrelevant, because the creature has found a much simpler problem than the one they've been posing for it. By the time the team arrives, the damage is done. The ocean has made its point. The rules have changed again. And Act 2's final image, the Meg moving away from the leisure boat's wreckage, diving back under the surface, disappearing into the blue as completely as if it had never been there, is the film's clearest statement yet about what they're actually dealing with. Not a problem to be solved, not a threat to be neutralized from a safe distance, a force. Old and patient and entirely indifferent to the plans of the people trying to stop it. Act 3 will be about what Jonas Taylor does when the plans run out. Here's what you need to understand about the Sanya beach sequence. Before a single frame of it plays, it is the film's thesis statement made physical. Everything the Meg has been building toward. The arrogance of assuming the deep ocean stays where we put it, the cost of underestimating something ancient and enormous, the specific human talent for crowding onto a beautiful stretch of water with no awareness of what might be underneath, arrives here all at once in the loudest possible way. Sanya is packed. It's a brilliant summer day. The kind of beach that exists in photographs people use to make other people jealous. White sand, clear water, hundreds of tourists floating on inflatables, children in the shallows, a general atmosphere of complete, wonderful, catastrophically misplaced safety. And moving beneath all of it, with that patient, unhurried efficiency that the film has been characterizing all along, is 75 feet of prehistoric killing machine. Turtletop doesn't play the beach sequence for suspense in the traditional sense, he plays it for scale. The camera rises, aerial, wide, pulling back, and what you see is the absolute disproportion of the situation. All those people, all that noise and color and life on the surface, and below it, a shape so large it dwarfs every boat in the frame. The horror isn't in what you don't see, it's in what you do see, and the gap between what the people on that beach understand about their situation and what the audience has been watching for an hour and a half. When the Meg moves, the sequence becomes organized chaos of the highest order. Turtletop's experience on crowd-scale action, managing multiple story threads simultaneously without losing the audience in the geography, pays off hard here. Jonas and the team are coming in fast from the waterside. Civilians are evacuating. The creature is doing what the creature does. And the film holds all of it in frame with a spatial coherence that keeps the chaos readable rather than merely overwhelming. You always know where Jonas is. You always know where the Meg is. You know, with a sinking clarity, when those two vectors are about to intersect. This sequence also contains one of the film's most effective pure comedy beats, the moment involving the dog and the small inflatable, and the question of whether the film is going to do what it very much looks like it's about to do. It doesn't. But the decision to get right to the edge of it, then pull back, is Turtletop at his most confident. He knows his audience, he knows what they're laughing at and what they're genuinely worried about. The dog beat is a pressure valve. It releases tension at exactly the right moment, reminds the audience that this movie knows how to have fun, and then immediately pivots back into genuine stakes without losing a beat. And then the film does something nobody entirely expected. A second Megalodon. The reveal of a second creature isn't played as a late-act twist in the M. Night Shyamalan sense. There's no dramatic musical sting, no moment of stunned silence while characters process the implications. It arrives almost matter-of-factly, the way the worst complications always do, in the middle of an already critical situation, as one more thing that has to be dealt with right now. The first Meg, the one the team has been tracking, is the larger of the two. The second is slightly smaller, slightly being a relative term when you're discussing animals of this scale, faster, and demonstrably less patient. This choice raises the film's stakes without requiring any additional exposition or setup. It also reframes the thermocline breach retroactively. The first creature didn't just escape from the deep ocean ecosystem, it opened a door. And when a door is opened, whatever was waiting on the other side doesn't necessarily wait in a polite single-file line. The team's response to this development is one of the film's most entertaining ensemble moments. There's a beat where the full weight of the situation lands on all of them at once. Two creatures, open water, a beach full of civilians, insufficient hardware, and the collective reaction is the kind of darkly comic professionalism that good ensemble casts do better than any amount of scripted banter. Nobody panics, they just recalibrate. What are the assets? What's the exposure? Who goes where? There's a gallows humor to how quickly the team absorbs an objectively insane development and turns it into an operational checklist. Morris, facing the full consequence of his earlier choices, the delayed notification, the suppressed communications, the decision to treat a prehistoric predator in international waters as a containment problem rather than an emergency, has a moment that Rainn Wilson plays with more genuine weight than you might expect from this character. He's been the film's comedy villain throughout, the human face of institutional indifference, and the performance has been calibrated accordingly. But standing on the deck of Mono One watching the chaos he helped enable, Wilson finds something real in Morris that the script gestures at rather than fully writes. It doesn't rehabilitate the character, it just makes him human for a moment. Expensive lesson. The second Meg gets dealt with through a combination of teamwork and the specific kind of brutal efficiency that the film has been building Jonas toward. But the first, the original, the one Jonas has been in the water with twice before, that one is his. The final dive sequence is the purest expression of everything the Meg has been saying about his protagonist. Jonas goes into the water alone, in a shark cage lowered from Mono One, with a plan that requires him to get close enough to a 75-foot Megalodon that he can deliver a fatal dose of poison directly into the animal's eye socket. Not from a submarine, not from a drone, in person, with his hands. With his hands. The logistics of the plan are explained quickly and clearly, which is the right call, because the film understands that the audience doesn't need to understand every technical detail of what Jonas is attempting. What they need to understand is the ask. He has to be close enough to touch it. Everything that has happened to Jonas Taylor in the past 5 years, the isolation, the self-imposed exile, the 2 crew members he couldn't save, the career that ended in an inquiry room where nobody believed him, has been pointing toward this water, toward this choice. He got it wrong once before by his own reckoning. The only way to live with that is to get it right now. The underwater photography in this final sequence is the most technically ambitious in the film. Tom Stern finds a way to make open ocean water feel as claustrophobic as the deep trench footage from Act 1, not through darkness, but through the sheer mass of the creature filling the frame. When the Meg moves around Jonas's cage, the scale of it creates its own kind of confinement. There's nowhere to go. The cage isn't protection, it's the thinnest possible suggestion of a boundary. Jonas knows that. The Meg, in its ancient, opaque way, almost certainly knows it too. The sequence builds through a series of passes, the creature circling, testing, applying that same investigative patience it has demonstrated throughout the film, and Jonas waiting, holding, not because he's frozen, but because he's learned. You don't rush it. You wait for the moment when the animal's own hunting instinct creates the opening you need. When the opening comes, it's not a triumph in the cinematic sense of slow-motion heroics and swelling score. It's fast, clinical. Statham moves with the economy of someone who has spent his whole life reducing the distance between himself and a problem to its absolute minimum. The deliver is clean. It works. And what follows? The Meg's final moments. The massive, slow roll of an animal that has outlasted 3 million years of extinction events, finally meeting something it wasn't designed to survive, is shot with a strange, spared dignity. The film doesn't gloat. It lets the moment be what it is, enormous and sad and over. Jonas surfaces. The team is there. The beach is clearing. The secondary creature has been dealt with. Suyin pulls Jonas out of the water, and neither of them says anything profound because profound things are rarely said after the real version of these moments. Only in movies that are less honest about what relief actually feels like. It feels like exhaustion. It feels like the specific, mundane joy of being alive and breathing and no longer in immediate danger. What the ending of the Meg chooses to leave you with is not resolution in the tidy sense. The ocean is still the ocean. The deep is still the deep. The thermocline breach happened. Whatever ecosystem exists below it is still there, still sealed off, still producing animals whose scale and nature we haven't begun to categorize. The two megalodons are dead, but the film has been careful throughout its entire runtime to never suggest that two is all there are. That ambiguity is a sequel hook, yes, but it's also something more honest than most blockbusters manage in their final frames, an acknowledgement that the natural world doesn't end when the credits roll. The ocean was here before us, it will be here after us, and whatever it contains, whatever ancient things are still living in the dark at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, it isn't keeping count of the things we've killed. Jonas stands on the deck of Mana 1, looks at the water, the Pacific, impossibly vast, impossibly old, already closing over the evidence of what just happened, like it always does. Somewhere below the surface, the sonar is pinging something large, far down. It's probably nothing. Creature features live and die by their humans. Not because audiences come for the humans, they don't, not primarily, but because without humans worth caring about, the creature has nothing to threaten. A monster without stakes is just a special effect, and the Meg, which has a genuinely extraordinary special effect at its center, understands this well enough to populate its world with characters who do real work. Not all of them get the same depth, not all of them need it, but the film's ensemble is constructed with a kind of pragmatic intelligence. Every person on screen has a function, a personality, and at least one moment that makes them feel like someone rather than something. Let's start at the top. Jonas Taylor, the man who was right. There's a version of Jonas Taylor that's just Jason Statham doing what Jason Statham does. Physical, efficient, largely impervious to damage. The Meg could have been that version. It chose not to be, and the decision elevates the film considerably above its genre peers. What Statham brings to Jonas that he hasn't always been asked to bring to his action roles is psychological specificity. Jonas isn't defined by capability, he has that in surplus, but by consequence. The event that opens the film, the decision to cut the damaged section loose and let two crew members die, isn't framed as the right call tragically misunderstood. It's framed as the right call that Jonas has never fully forgiven himself for making. Those are different things. The first is a redemption arc setup. The second is something closer to actual grief. Watch Statham in the Thai bar scene, the one where Mac tracks him down and makes the ask. He's not playing reluctance as a narrative device. He's playing a man who genuinely believes his presence in dangerous situations costs people their lives. The drinking isn't escapism, it's a kind of quarantine. He's keeping himself away from situations where his judgment might be needed, because the last time his judgment was needed, two people didn't come home. The physical stillness Statham brings to the scene, the way Jonas barely moves, barely reacts, processes information inward rather than outward, tells you everything about where this character has been living for 5 years. This makes the rescue mission in Act 1 not just an action set piece, but a psychological test. Jonas doesn't go back because he's a hero. He goes back because Lori is down there, and the specific emotional architecture of his guilt won't allow him to sit on a beach while someone he damaged ends up dead in the dark. It's the most human possible motivation. Not nobility, not duty, but the specific debt of a relationship he couldn't hold together. Statham plays the underwater rescue with exactly this undertow running beneath the surface professionalism. Every decision he makes down there is colored by the awareness that he's done this before and lost. What the film does with Jonas's arc in Act 2 and 3 is quieter than you'd expect. There's no formal moment of healing, no speech where Jonas admits what he's been carrying. The transformation happens through action, through the accumulated evidence, sequence by sequence, that his judgment is sound, that his instincts are trustworthy, that the call he made in the Philippine Trench 5 years ago was the only call available. By the time he's alone in the cage with the Meg at the end, the script hasn't told you he's ready. It's shown you, in 30 small increments, that he's been ready since Act 1 and just needed the world to give him permission to believe it. That's good character writing. And Statham, who has spent years being underestimated as a dramatic actor, delivers it with the same economy of motion he brings to every fight sequence. He doesn't show you the emotion, he shows you the containment of it. And the gap between those two things is exactly where Jonas Taylor lives. One specific scene deserves to be called out, the moment after the first kill attempt fails, when Jonas sits alone at the stern of one of Manawan's support vessels and runs through the encounter data in his head. Nobody else is in the frame, there's no dialogue. Statham holds it for maybe 20 seconds, which is an eternity in a film moving at this pace, and you can watch, if you're paying attention, a man absorbing new information about an adversary and filing it precisely in the mental architecture he's been building since the prologue. It's a quiet scene and a loud movie. It's also one of the best things in it. Suyin Jung. More than the script asks for. Li Bingbing's Suyin is the character the Meg most clearly undersells, and also the character whose performance most consistently exceeds what it's given on the page. The role as written gives Suyin 3 primary functions: scientific expert, co-action lead, and potential romantic interest for Jonas. That's a perfectly functional trifecta for a film of this type, but it doesn't necessarily make for a fully realized person. What Li Bingbing adds, in choices the script doesn't mandate, but doesn't prevent, is a texture that turns Suyin into someone with a continuous interior life rather than a character who exists to do specific things in specific scenes. Suyin is a scientist who dives. That combination is more specific than it sounds. She approaches physical danger the way a researcher approaches an anomalous data point, with methodical interest rather than fear. When she insists on being in the water in situations where Jonas thinks she shouldn't be, it's not recklessness. It's the professional conviction of someone who has spent her career understanding the ocean in ways that desk-based analysis can't provide. You can see it in how she moves underwater. Deliberate, observational, her attention distributed rather than tunnel vision. She's watching the Meg the way you watch something you want to understand, not just survive. Her dynamic with Jonas is the film's most interesting relationship, precisely because it's never fully resolved. The attraction is present, but unforced. It develops through shared high-pressure experience, through the trust established in the buoy network sequence, through the specific intimacy of two people who have been genuinely frightened by the same thing at the same time. What Li Bingbing plays underneath all the action is the growing sense that Suyin is reassessing her initial read on Jonas, not discovering he's a better person than she thought, but recognizing that the specific qualities she found frustrating in him, his instinct over data approach, his tendency to act before explaining, are precisely what keeps them both alive when the data runs out. The scene where she pulls him out of the water after the final kill is the relationship's emotional landing point, and both actors play it with admirable restraint. No declaration, no resolution, just two people who have been through something together and are now standing on the same side of it, breathing. That's more than a lot of blockbusters manage. If the film has a genuine missed opportunity in its character work, it's that Suyin's perspective on the scientific implications of the discovery. What the Megalodon's existence means for oceanography, for our understanding of evolutionary biology, for the entire framework of deep-sea research, is largely subordinated to the operational demands of the plot. There's a more interesting version of this character where she has more sustained interior conflict about the fact that the animal they're hunting is, in purely scientific terms, the most significant discovery in the history of marine biology. The Meg gestures at this without fully committing. Li Bingbing gives you the sense that Suyin feels it, even when the script moves on before she can express it. Jack Morris, the sharpest tool in the film. Here's a counterintuitive argument. Rainn Wilson's Morris is the most carefully constructed character in the Meg. Not the most sympathetic, not the most developed in terms of arc, but the most precise. The film needs a human antagonist, not a villain in the operational sense, not someone who deliberately causes harm through malice, but a villain in the structural sense, someone whose presence creates complications that wouldn't exist without them. Morris fills this role, but the film is smart enough to build him from a real-world archetype rather than a cartoon. He's the tech billionaire as specific cultural type. The man who funded the project owns the outcome and cannot be made to understand that some problems can't be solved by reframing the parameters. Wilson plays this with complete physical commitment. Morris moves through the film with the body language of someone accustomed to rooms that rearrange themselves around his comfort, slightly ahead of his own footsteps, slightly louder than necessary, occupying slightly more space than the situation requires. It's a steady performance that works because Wilson never tips it into obvious buffoonery. Morris is genuinely intelligent. He's made real money doing real things. His problem isn't stupidity, it's the specific blind spot that comes with never having been in a situation that money couldn't fix. The Morris arc, and he has one, compressed though it is, tracks the progressive failure of this worldview under conditions the ocean provides. Act 1. Containment and narrative control. Act 2. Operational management, bringing in outside resources, maintaining the fiction that this is a solvable problem. Act 3. Standing on a deck watching the consequences of his choices arrive in the form of a panicking beach. Wilson's performance in that final beat is the most interesting thing he does in the film, the specific, slightly dazed look of a man who has run out of things to optimize. That Morris ultimately gets what's coming to him, in a sequence that is simultaneously expected and executed with enough commitment to land, is the film's most overt moral statement. It doesn't moralize. It just applies physics. The ensemble, small roles, specific humanity. What separates a well-made blockbuster from a competent one is often found not in the leads, but in the supporting cast, and whether the people surrounding the main characters feel like real people or narrative furniture. The Meg gets this right, in ways that don't call attention to themselves. Mac. Cliff Curtis is doing something specific and valuable in this role. Mac is the film's emotional glue, the person who genuinely likes Jonas, genuinely believes in the mission, and genuinely functions as the connective tissue between the facility's scientific work and the operational reality of what they're all doing. Curtis plays warmth without softness. Mac is the kind of person who makes the work feel manageable, not by minimizing the danger, but by refusing to be defeated by it. His friendship with Jonas is the film's most comfortable relationship, a pre-established trust that reads as real rather than performed, and Curtis's natural ease in the role is exactly why. Toshi Masioka has limited screen time and uses it perfectly. Toshi operates in the film's background as the reliable team member, present, competent, not overwritten, which is exactly why, when his moment comes, it lands with weight entirely disproportionate to his apparent role in the story. The self-sacrifice sequence in the rescue operation is the film's most genuinely affecting moment, not because it's designed as a tearjerker, but because Oka has done the quiet work of making Toshi feel like a real person rather than a plot function. You like him before you need to. That's the whole trick, and it works. DJ. Paige Kennedy's DJ is the ensemble's designated comic relief, and the film handles this assignment with more intelligence than the genre typically manages. DJ is funny, genuinely funny, not just loud, because Kennedy has a timing precision that makes even broad material land with specificity. More importantly, the film never asks DJ to be heroic in ways that betray the character. His courage, when it comes, is scaled to who he actually is, someone who is scared and shows it and does the thing anyway. That's more relatable than inexplicable bravery, and Kennedy plays it with a realness that keeps DJ from becoming a punchline. Jax. Ruby Rose's role is the most underwritten in the ensemble, which is frustrating because what's there suggests a more interesting character. Jax is the facility's engineer, practical and precise, and Rose plays her with a cool competence that establishes the character clearly in very little time. The film doesn't give her much to do beyond that establishment, which is a minor but genuine missed opportunity. An ensemble this functional creates space for every member to have a moment. Jax's moment never quite arrives. Dr. Quex. Minwei Zhang. Winston Chow brings a specific quality to this role that the film needs, legitimate authority without authoritarianism. Zhang is the adult in the room, experienced, genuinely accomplished in his field, capable of making hard decisions without the performative decisiveness that less secure characters use as a substitute for actual judgment. His dynamic with Morris is the most sustained piece of thematic work the supporting cast does. Two men who have been occupying the same professional space for what appears to be years, one of whom respects what it represents and one of whom sees it as an asset. Chow plays Zhang's sustained, dignified frustration with Morris as a man who has been dealing with this particular category of problem for decades and has developed the patience of someone who knows. History tends to side with the scientists eventually. Laurie. Jessica McNamee has a limited role by design. Laurie functions primarily as the emotional catalyst for Jonas's return rather than as a fully independent character, but McNamee makes the most of the scarcity. The through-the-glass moment during the rescue and the brief aftermath scene that follows establish a history without explaining it. There's a specific sadness in how Laurie looks at Jonas that isn't resentment and isn't love and isn't forgiveness. It's the particular tiredness of someone who has processed a painful thing to completion and come out the other side functional. McNamee finds that note in seconds and holds it. The Meg, itself, an antagonist worth respecting. This deserves a direct mention in the character section, because the film treats its creature with enough behavioral consistency that it functions as a genuine antagonist rather than a wandering hazard. The Megalodon in this film has a discernible personality, insofar as an animal of this evolutionary antiquity can be said to have one. It's curious. It investigates before it attacks. It demonstrates what the script implies is pattern recognition, the ability to identify the tactical parameters of a situation and respond to the edges of a trap rather than blundering into it. When the poison-tipped kill attempt fails, there's a reading of the creature's subsequent behavior that suggests it has, on some level, identified the team's approach as something to be navigated rather than simply endured. Whether the film intends this level of characterization is almost beside the point. What matters is that the Meg's behavior is consistent enough, scene to scene, that the audience learns to read it, to understand what it's doing and why, to anticipate its next move a beat before the characters do. That gap between audience knowledge and character knowledge is one of the fundamental engines of suspense, and the Meg runs it efficiently throughout by giving its creature something that at least resembles interiority. The final sequence validates that. Jonas doesn't win through superior firepower or overwhelming force. He wins by understanding how the Meg hunts, by knowing what kind of movement triggers an attack, by reading the creature's approach speed and trajectory, by treating the encounter as a problem of behavioral prediction rather than physical confrontation. He beats it by learning it. And that's the film's most quietly intelligent character choice. The antagonist is defeated not when Jonas becomes more powerful, but when he becomes more accurate in his understanding of what he's dealing with. That's a character arc for a shark. The Meg has no right to pull that off. It does anyway. There's a moment roughly 40 minutes into The Meg where the Megalodon rises beneath a pod of sperm whales and the camera just holds, on the full silhouette of the creature against the pale blue of mid-ocean water. No cut, no score spike, just the image, given enough time to exist in the viewer's brain. And in that single, uninterrupted shot, you can see exactly what separates the technical execution of this film from the creature features that surround it. Not the budget, not the runtime, the discipline. The willingness to trust the image rather than rescue it with editing. Good craft in a movie like this is invisible when it works and catastrophic when it doesn't. The Meg works. Here's why. Cinematography. Tom Stern and the Grammar of the Deep. Tom Stern is not the cinematographer you'd immediately predict for this assignment. His career has been built in collaboration with Clint Eastwood, Mystic River, $1 Million Baby, Letters from Iwo Jima, films defined by restraint, by shadow, by the kind of visual storytelling that operates through implication rather than declaration. That background turns out to be exactly the right preparation for shooting a 130 million short film. The central visual challenge of The Meg is spatial. How do you make a creature this large feel genuinely threatening when you have to establish its scale relative to human-sized characters in every sequence? The failure mode is CGI insertion syndrome, a creature that looks composited, that occupies a separate visual layer from the live-action footage, that the brain recognizes as artificial no matter how technically accomplished the rendering is. Stern's solution is environmental consistency. Every shot of the Meg exists in the same quality of light, the same color temperature, the same grain structure as the human footage surrounding it. He builds the visual world around the creature, rather than dropping the creature into a pre-existing world. The underwater photography divides into two distinct visual registers that Stern maintains with rigid consistency throughout the film. The deep water sequences, anything below the thermocline, anything in the dark, are shot with available light principles, deep blues, available bioluminescence where the script provides it, long lenses that compress depth and create the psychological effect of limited visibility. You can't see what's at the edges of the frame. That's intentional. The shallower sequences, the buoy network, the beach approaches, the surface pursuits, open up into the cooler, higher contrast palette of natural Pacific light, wider compositions that show you more of the world and therefore make the creature's intrusion into it more legible. The above-surface aerial work deserves specific credit. The opening establishment shots of Mana 1, the facility isolated on an enormous, empty ocean, used the same compositional logic as the underwater work, human scale made deliberately small against the vastness of the environment. The ocean is never a backdrop in this film. Stern shoots it as a presence, a thing with mass and character, not just a blue surface for action to occur on. When the camera pulls back to show the Sanya beach at full population, the aerial framing does something the script alone can't accomplish. It makes the beach feel simultaneously crowded and vulnerable, all those people reduced to a thin stripe of color against an ocean that extends to the horizon in every direction. The single-take approach to the whale sequence has already been mentioned in the context of storytelling, but technically it represents a significant compositional risk. Held shots succeed or fail based on whether the image itself contains enough internal movement and development to sustain attention. Stern fills this one. The whale pod moves, the water surface catches light differently as clouds shift, and the gradual emergence of the Meg's silhouette from the midwater darkness gives the composition a progression that unfolds like a slow reveal in a still photograph. It's a shot that would look at home in a nature documentary, which is precisely the effect it's going for. VFX, building a creature that moves like truth. Sony Pictures Imageworks led the VFX on the Meg, with additional contributions from Image Engine and Scanline VFX. The creature work totals somewhere in the region of 1,400 visual effects shots, an enormous number for a film that, at its best, feels like it's using CGI as little as possible. That gap between perception and reality is the measure of the VFX team's achievement. The foundational challenge was scientific plausibility. Megalodon is real. The fossil record establishes it unambiguously, but what it actually looked like in motion is genuinely unknown. The team's approach was rigorous. Start with the great white shark as a physiological template, the closest living analog in terms of body plan and hunting behavior. Apply the scaling mathematics that paleontologists use to estimate Megalodon's actual dimensions, and then test every movement decision against the physics of how that mass would actually behave in water. The key physical reality that drove most of the animation decisions is inertia. A 75-foot animal weighing somewhere in the range of 60-70 tons cannot accelerate and decelerate at the same rate as a 17-foot great white. It carries momentum. It needs distance to change direction. Its attack runs begin further away and travel in longer arcs. The VFX team built these physics into the Meg's movement at a foundational level, which means that even in sequences where the creature is moving very fast, there's a plausibility to its trajectory that registers subliminally even if viewers can't articulate why it feels right. The surface breach shots, the Meg clearing the water fully during the beach sequence, were the most technically demanding in the production. Water simulation at that scale, interacting with a creature of that mass, at that velocity, generates computational complexity that quickly becomes unmanageable. Scanline VFX, whose specialty is large-scale fluid simulation, handled the primary water interaction shots. The displaced water, the bow wave ahead of the creature, the spray patterns during the breach, the way the ocean closes behind it, is physically accurate in ways that most viewers will never consciously register, but that their eyes will accept as real on first contact. One specific choice worth noting, the Meg's coloration. The film goes with a deep charcoal gray, nearly black on the dorsal surface, fading to pale gray on the ventral. This is counter-shadows coloration, the same basic pattern that great whites use, which makes them difficult to spot from above, dark against dark water, or from below, pale against pale sky. By giving the Meg a functional coloration rather than a dramatic one, the film reinforces its naturalistic approach to the creature at a purely visual level. It doesn't look designed to be scary, it looks designed to hunt. The scale work, maintaining convincing spatial relationships between the Meg and human-sized reference objects, was accomplished through a combination of practical and digital approaches. For close-approach shots, the production built a partial practical head, allowing the actors to physically interact with something rather than pure green screen. Statham's final sequence with the creature is partly grounded in this practical element, which gives the performance a physicality that pure CGI performance capture can't fully replicate. He's reacting to something that has mass and texture and presence, and the authenticity of that reaction sells the digital extension of the creature around it. Sound design, the pressure you feel before you hear. If the VFX work in the Meg is the element that gets discussed most frequently, the sound design is the element that does the most work without receiving equivalent credit. This is a film that lives and dies underwater. in an environment where sound behaves completely differently than it does on the surface, and the sound team builds that difference into the film with a rigor that operates below conscious awareness. Deep water is not silent. This is a misconception so pervasive that most films don't bother correcting it. At depth, the ocean is full of sound. Low-frequency groaning of shifting geological formations, the biological noise of marine life, the hull stress of man-made structures under pressure. The Mana One research facility, in the film's audio landscape, has a specific acoustic signature, a constant low-frequency hum of systems under load, the ping of active sonar that the ear starts to filter out after a few minutes and then notices with renewed attention whenever it stops. The absence of the sonar ping is one of the film's recurring audio cues for approaching danger, the system going quiet because the scale of what is detected is outside its calibration range. The Meg itself has almost no vocalizations. This is a deliberate choice, and it's the right one. Giving a shark a roar, or any of the dramatic sonic signature that creature features typically use, would immediately undermine the naturalism the film has been building. Instead, the creature's presence is communicated through water displacement. The deep, sub-bass thump of something that large moving that fast through water, felt more than heard, a frequency that, in the theatrical environment, particularly in Dolby Atmos configurations, registers in the chest rather than the ears. The first indication that the Meg is nearby is almost always this sub-bass pulse, arriving a beat before any visual information. The audience knows before the characters do. That temporal gap is pure suspense craft. The surface sequences invert this audio logic deliberately. Once the Meg breaches into the upper ocean and the film opens onto the Sanya Beach sequence, the sound mix expands into crowd noise, wind, surf, the ambient clutter of public space. The sonic contrast with the deep water sequences is immediate and total. What this does is exactly what a well-designed sound mix should do. It tells you where you are without a word of dialogue. The deep water feels enclosed, pressurized, intimate with threat. The surface feels open, chaotic, and, paradoxically, more dangerous because the threat is now invisible in noise rather than in silence. Score: Harry Gregson Williams and the music that doesn't try to be Jaws. This needs to be addressed directly, because any film about a shark is operating in the shadow of John Williams' two-note achievement, and how a composer handles that shadow tells you a great deal about their confidence in the material they've been given. Harry Gregson Williams handles it by ignoring it entirely. There is no two-note motif in the Meg. There is no attempt to replicate the oscillating bass figure that Williams used to encode underwater threat into the collective cinematic memory. Gregson Williams writes around it, working with a palette that leans toward orchestral tension, building strings in long, unresolved sustained notes rather than rhythmic patterns, brass that enters low and rises rather than striking at a predetermined beat. The creature theme, insofar as the film has one, is built on absence rather than presence. When the Meg is nearby, the score thins rather than swells, a technique borrowed from horror more than action, where silence communicates danger more efficiently than volume. This is musically counterintuitive for a blockbuster, and Gregson Williams executes it with a confidence that suggests either genuine artistic conviction or a director who gave him the freedom to try something unusual. Either way, it works. The action sequences use the score differently. During the whale sequence, the beach evacuation, the final dive, Gregson Williams opens up into full orchestral drive, not cacophonous, but kinetic, the kind of urgent forward motion that pushes sequence timing without overwhelming the sound design beneath it. The balance here is delicate. The score has to provide emotional momentum without drowning out the creature's sub-bass signature, which is doing its own work simultaneously. On a good theatrical sound system, these two layers operate in distinct frequency bands: score in the mid and upper registers, creature physics in the sub-bass, and the interaction between them creates a full-body audio experience that home video can approximate but not fully replicate. The score's best moment, and this is an underappreciated one, is the sequence immediately following the first failed kill attempt. The music drops entirely. For nearly 40 seconds, the film runs in near silence, ocean ambience, equipment noise, breathing. Then, a single sustained string note enters, low, and holds without resolution. It communicates everything the scene needs to communicate about the team's situation without a word of dialogue or a frame of exposition. That's scoring as storytelling, and it's what separates a good film composer from a functional one. The craft as a whole, why it adds up. What the Meg's technical work achieves collectively is a consistent reality, not photographic reality. The film isn't trying to convince you that megalodons are alive and hunting the Pacific. Perceptual reality, the feeling sustained across 113 minutes that the world on screen operates according to the same physical laws as the world in your seat. The creature displaces water correctly. The sound design pressurizes correctly. The cinematography uses light and shadow correctly. The score moves in the emotional register. The sequences demand rather than the one convention dictates. In a genre where the failure mode is constant, where CGI creatures float slightly above the water, where sound design defaults to roaring and impact noise, where scores swell at every moment regardless of whether swelling is warranted, the Meg makes the disciplined choice at almost every technical juncture. It earns its spectacle. It respects its audience's eyes and ears enough to give them material that holds up under the sustained attention a 113-minute film demand. The craft doesn't announce itself. It shouldn't. The best technical filmmaking is the kind that gets out of the story's way and lets the story be the thing you remember. What you remember about the Meg is the Meg. The craft is why you believe in it. The Meg is not a film that wears its themes on its sleeve. It doesn't stop for philosophical monologues. Nobody delivers a speech about humanity's relationship with the natural world while standing on a rain-soaked deck. The thematic content arrives the way it does in the best genre films, embedded in the mechanics of the story, visible if you're looking, invisible if you're just here for the shark. Both are legitimate responses to this movie. But if you look, there's more here than the premise suggests, and the ideas it's working with are more current and more uncomfortable than a 130 million summer blockbuster is typically given credit for. The hubris engine. Every great monster story is, at some level, a hubris story. Frankenstein, Jurassic Park, Godzilla. The creature is never just a creature. It's the physical consequence of a decision someone made to push further than the available wisdom recommended. The Meg knows this tradition and works squarely within it, but it updates the specific flavor of hubris for the contemporary moment with more precision than is typically credited for. Zhang, or his team, who create the problem. They're researchers, careful and methodical, operating within the protocols their expertise has established. The hubris is financial. It's Morris, the billionaire investor, who funds the expedition to the subthermocline ecosystem. It's the commercial logic of deep-sea exploration, the need to justify expenditure with discovery to turn scientific curiosity into return on investment. That creates the pressure which leads to the thermocline breach. The research team didn't exceed their competence, they exceeded their funding constraints, which comes to the same catastrophic result through a different mechanism. This is a precise and contemporary updating of the genre's foundational anxiety. In 1975, the threat in Jaws was a municipal authority covering up a shark attack to protect beach tourism revenue. In 1993, the threat in Jurassic Park was a tech entrepreneur monetizing genetic resurrection. In 2018, the threat in the Meg is venture capital applied to scientific discovery, without regard for what scientific discovery sometimes uncovers. The monster is real, but the door was opened by someone looking at a spreadsheet. Morris never intends harm. This matters. He isn't malicious, he's indifferent, which the film correctly identifies as the more dangerous quality. Malice has limits. Indifference to consequence is structurally unlimited. And the specific form his indifference takes, the suppression of information, the insistence on containment over transparency, the prioritizing of asset protection over human safety, maps precisely onto the documented behavior of institutions confronted with externalities they weren't prepared to price. The Meg is a creature feature, and it's also, running quietly beneath the action, a film about what happens when the people with the capital make the calls that the people with the knowledge should be making. The ocean as honest mirror. The ocean in the Meg functions as more than a setting. It functions as a corrective, a constant, patient reminder of the actual scale of things relative to the human beings moving across its surface. There's a specific anxiety that the film taps into that goes deeper than shark fear. It's the anxiety of depth itself, the knowledge, widely understood but rarely confronted directly, that the vast majority of the Earth's oceans remain unmapped and unstudied. More of the surface of Mars has been charted than the floor of the Pacific. Whatever is living in the deep ocean, whatever has been evolving down there in pressure and darkness for millions of years, beyond the reach of our instruments and the limits of our imagination, we genuinely don't know. The Meg takes this factual reality and extrapolates it one precise step. What if something survived down there that we assumed was gone? The answer the film proposes isn't supernatural. It isn't science fiction in the sense of imagining technology or physics that doesn't exist. It's science fiction in the stricter, more interesting sense of asking a what-if question that the available science cannot definitively rule out. Megalodon existed. The deep ocean is inadequately explored. The thermocline as a concept, chemical or thermal barriers that create distinct ecosystem boundaries, is real oceanography. The film's premise is, in the most technical sense, not impossible, and that proximity to plausibility is what gives the anxiety its grip. It doesn't care about the research mission, the financial stakes, the personal histories of the people operating on its surface. When the Meg arrives at the Sanya beach, it isn't making a statement. It isn't punishing hubris in any morally intentional sense. It's doing what it has been doing for 3.5 million years, hunting. The natural world in this film is completely indifferent to human making, and that indifference is more frightening than malice, because there's nothing to negotiate with. You can't reason with the ocean. You can't appeal to it. You can only get out of its way or get better at understanding it, which is, not coincidentally, exactly what Jonas Taylor does. The U.S.-China frame, a new kind of blockbuster anxiety. This is the theme that The Meg is least explicit about, and the one that deserves the most direct examination, because the U.S.-China co-production structure isn't just a financial arrangement. It's a cultural statement, and it produces a specific ideological texture that distinguishes this film from virtually every American blockbuster made before the mid-2010s. The default structure of Hollywood's global films, for most of cinema history, has been American competence at the center and everyone else at the margins. The hero is American. The expertise is American. The other nationalities provide color, context, and occasionally a useful local contact. The Meg breaks this architecture deliberately and completely. The research facility is Chinese-led. The director of operations is Chinese. The scientist whose expertise is most relevant to understanding the creature is Chinese. The American protagonist arrives as a guest, capable, irreplaceable in his specific function, but operating within an institutional framework that isn't his. This might sound like a minor structural adjustment. It isn't. It changes what the film is about on a level beneath the plot. The Mono One facility isn't a backdrop for American heroism. It's a genuinely collaborative enterprise in which Chinese and American expertise are both necessary and neither is sufficient alone. Jonas's instinct needs Suyin's science. Suyin's science needs Jonas's operational experience. Neither of them solves the problem. They solve it together. And the film's Chinese characters, Zhang, Suyin, Toshi, the broader facility crew, are depicted as competent, brave, and fully human in ways that the tokenistic representation in older co-productions simply wasn't. Whether audiences in 2018 consciously registered this shift is less important than the fact that it was made. The Meg was produced at a specific moment in the history of U.S.-China relations, before the trade tensions of the following years hardened into something more adversarial, and it represents, in blockbuster form, an optimistic argument about what genuine collaboration between the world's two largest economies might look like when neither side is subordinated to the other. The monster is defeated, not by American exceptionalism, but by international competence applied collectively. That's not an accident, it's a choice, and it's one of the most quietly interesting choices in the film. Redemption as recalibration. Jonas Taylor's personal arc carries a theme that the film handles with more subtlety than action movies typically manage: the difference between redemption and absolution. Redemption is what Jonas doesn't get. The two crew members who died in the Philippine Trench stay dead. The inquiry that ended his career doesn't reconvene. The professional reputation he lost isn't restored by the credits. The film doesn't give him any of this, because giving him any of it would be dishonest about what actually changes and what doesn't when someone does a terrible necessary thing for which there is no clean resolution. What Jonas gets is recalibration. He gets the evidence, accumulated in real time, under real pressure, that his judgment is trustworthy. Not perfect, not infallible, but trustworthy in the specific, limited, practically important sense that when Jonas Taylor reads a situation and makes a call, the call is usually the right one. The call in the Philippine Trench was the right one. It cost 2 lives to save 8, and that math, horrible as it is the kind of math that rescue operations require. Jonas couldn't accept that for 5 years because accepting it meant accepting that there was no version of events in which the outcome was different. The beach bar in Sanya wasn't guilt. It was the avoidance of that acceptance. What the Meg operation gives him, what the whole brutal arc of the film's 3 acts actually does, is force him back into conditions where his judgment matters, where the stakes are absolute, and where the evidence of those stakes is immediate and undeniable. He makes calls throughout the film. Some of them work perfectly. Some of them work imperfectly and cost something. None of them break him, because he's been through the worst version of this already and functioned. By the time he's alone in the cage with the Meg, he's not a man seeking redemption. He's a man who has stopped requiring it. That's a more honest emotional resolution than most action films offer. It doesn't feel triumphant in the conventional sense. It feels earned. The distinction matters. The anxiety underneath everything. The Meg is, in the end, a film about the limits of knowledge and what waits beyond them. Every branch of the film's thematic work connects back to this root. The hubris theme is about exceeding the limits of what we can safely know and manage. The ocean, as corrective theme, is about the humbling reality of how much remains unknown. The US-China collaboration theme is about what happens when different knowledge systems, different scientific traditions, different cultural approaches to risk and discovery are brought together rather than kept separate. Jonas's arc is about a man reaching the limit of what self-knowledge can process and finding, on the other side of it, something functional. The deep ocean is the film's central metaphor precisely because it is the most literal representation of the unknown in the contemporary world. We have mapped distant galaxies more thoroughly than we have mapped the bottom of the Pacific. Whatever is down there, in the dark, under pressure, beyond the thermocline, is genuinely, factually, scientifically unknown. The Meg proposes one specific thing that might be down there and watches what happens when it comes up. What happens is, what always happens when the unknown becomes the known. Everything reorganizes around the new reality. The frameworks that were adequate before are no longer adequate. The plans that made sense before have to be rebuilt. And the people most capable of navigating the transition are the ones who, when the world reveals that it's larger and stranger and more dangerous than the available maps suggested, say, "All right, adjust. What do we know now that we didn't know before, and how do we use it?" Jonas Taylor answers that question with a knife in a shark cage, which is, honestly, the most direct possible answer. When the Meg opened on August 10, 2018, the critical consensus landed roughly where you'd expect for a $130 million movie about a prehistoric shark. Cautious approval from those who graded on a genre curve, mild derision from those who didn't, and a general agreement that it was neither the disaster cynics predicted nor the secret masterpiece enthusiasts were hoping for. Rotten Tomatoes settled it at 46% from critics and 67% from audiences, a split that tells you more about the difference between what critics looked for and what audiences actually want from a summer Friday night than it tells you about the quality of the film itself. What the reviews couldn't capture and what box office clarified within the first weekend was that the Meg had connected with its audience in the way that matters most. For a commercial film, people showed up, they had a good time, and they told their friends. The opening weekend pulled $45 million domestically. Solid but not spectacular. Then the international numbers came in. China alone contributed over $150 million to the final gross. Southeast Asia, Australia, and Europe added the rest. By the time the theatrical run concluded, the Meg had cleared $530 million on a $130 million production budget, a return that, by any rational measure, constitutes a substantial hit. What the numbers actually said? The financial story of the Meg is more nuanced than a simple "it made money" summary captures, because the distribution of that money tells you something specific about where cinema was heading in 2018. The domestic gross, approximately $145 million, was respectable but wouldn't have justified the budget on its own. American audiences liked the Meg without loving it, the way you like a well-executed meal at a restaurant you didn't choose yourself. The film found its genuine enthusiasts overseas, and most specifically in China, where it became one of the year's significant commercial events. The combination of a recognizable Hollywood star in a straightforward action premise with a Chinese setting, Chinese characters in meaningful roles, and a production infrastructure that signaled genuine investment in the Chinese market rather than cursory nods to it, all of it landed exactly as intended. This made the Meg a data point in an argument Hollywood had been having with itself for several years. The studios had been experimenting with co-production models and Chinese market-conscious casting with mixed results, many of those experiments producing films that satisfied neither American nor Chinese audiences because they tried to please both without fully committing to either. The Meg was one of the cleaner demonstrations that the commitment had to be structural, not cosmetic additions to a fundamentally American product, but a film that was built internationally from the architecture up. The lesson was noted. It wasn't always applied correctly in subsequent productions because the lesson is harder than it looks and depends on creative choices that commerce doesn't automatically generate. But the Meg established a benchmark for what the model could achieve when executed with genuine intent rather than market calculation. The franchise it started. The commercial success translated, predictably, to a sequel. Meg 2, The Trench, released in August 2023, directed by Ben Wheatley. The 5-year gap between films was longer than the studio originally intended, complicated by the COVID-19 pandemic's disruption to production schedules and the shifting landscape of the US-China co-production model in the intervening years. Meg 2 arrived to an interesting set of expectations. The first film's success had created an audience with a specific understanding of what the series was. Earnest, well-executed creature entertainment that took its premise seriously without taking itself too seriously. Wheatley, a British director whose work ranges from the darkly comic Sightseers to the genuinely disturbing Kill List, brought a different sensibility to the material. The sequel leaned harder into the absurdist register than the first film, escalating the creature count and the action scale, while the critical reception remained similarly mixed. It performed reasonably at the global box office, though the geopolitical environment of 2023, U.S.-China tensions considerably more pronounced than in 2018, produced a notably different Chinese theatrical performance than its predecessor. The existence of the sequel and the franchise infrastructure that surrounds it is itself a measure of the Meg's impact. Properties that don't connect don't get sequels. Audiences don't return to worlds they didn't believe in the first time. The Meg franchise exists because John Turteltaub's original film did the foundational work correctly, established the world, earned investment in its characters, and delivered on its central promise with enough craft that the audience wanted to return to the water. What it did for Jason Statham. The film's legacy for its lead actor deserves specific consideration because The Meg marks something of a pivot in how Statham is understood as a screen presence. By 2018, Statham had spent 2 decades building one of the most consistent action careers in Hollywood, reliably bankable, formerly underestimated, the star of franchises, transporter, mechanic, that succeeded commercially while being largely ignored by the critical establishment. His work had genuine craft in it that rarely got discussed because the films it appeared in weren't the kind that critics excavated for craft. The Meg changed the conversation slightly, not because it's Statham's best performance, it probably isn't, but because it's the most mainstream visible performance in which he was asked to do something beyond physical capability. The psychological interiority the role required, and which he delivered, reached an audience that his genre-specific work hadn't previously touched. The film's enormous global gross put that performance in front of more people than almost anything else in his career. The result was a recalibration of Statham's perceived range, a recognition, slow but real, that the economy of his work was a stylistic choice rather than a limitation. The restraint in the Thai bar scene, the compressed grief in the rescue sequence, the clinical focus of the final dive, these were the choices of an actor who understood exactly what the role needed and delivered it without the decorative emotionalism that a less confident performer might have used to signal, "This is the serious part." The Meg is, quietly, one of the better arguments for Jason Statham as a more complete screen actor than his action star reputation fully accounts for. The genre position creature features occupy a peculiar position in the cinematic ecosystem. They're among the oldest genre conventions. The monster emerging from a forbidden place to threaten the human world predates cinema itself, running through mythology and literature straight into film's first decades. They're also among the most commercially volatile. For every Jaws that transcends the genre and achieves genuine cultural permanence, there are dozens of productions that deliver exactly what they advertise and disappear within the season. The Meg sits comfortably in a middle category that doesn't get enough credit. The well-made genre film that does exactly what it sets out to do, does it with skill and care, and in doing so, keeps a tradition alive for the next generation of filmmakers and audiences who will grow up with it as a reference point. It won't be taught in film schools as a formal innovation. It won't appear on decade-defining lists, but it will be rewatched. It will be the film that a specific cohort of teenagers in 2018 saw in a theater and remembered as the summer they discovered that creature features, executed properly, are genuinely fun in ways that more prestigious entertainments aren't. That's not a consolation prize. That's a real cultural function, and it's harder to fulfill than it looks. The question it leaves open. Here's what stays with you after the Meg, if you let it. We have sent probes to the outer solar system. We have photographed the surface of Pluto from 3 billion miles away. We have mapped the cosmic microwave background radiation from the beginning of the universe. And we have explored, in meaningful detail, roughly 20% of our own planet's ocean floor. The other 80% is still down there, still dark, still unmapped, still home to whatever has been evolving in the deep for longer than mammals have existed on land. Every few years, marine biologists document a species that has never been seen before, animals of significant size, operating in documented ocean regions, invisible to science until the moment they weren't. In 2023, a new species of beaked whale was described from specimens stranded on beaches in Mexico. The ocean introduces new acquaintances periodically, on its own schedule, without our invitation. The Meg imagines one specific introduction, the largest, the most ancient, the one that most directly addresses the question of whether apex predator status is something humanity earned permanently or simply hasn't been challenged on recently. It dresses the question in action movie clothes and sends Jason Statham into the water with a knife, which is the right response to a question of that magnitude. Rational, specific, entirely inadequate to the actual scale of the problem, but the best available option under current conditions. The film ends. The ocean continues. The sonar pings something large in the deep water, and the camera doesn't follow it down. Because what's at the bottom of the Mariana Trench isn't the point. The point is that we don't know what's there. The point is that we keep sending things down to look. The point is that the ocean has been around for 3.8 billion years, and has spent exactly 0 of them waiting for our instruments to catch up. A man swims toward a shadow with a knife. The shadow is bigger than the man can fully comprehend. The man goes anyway. That's the movie. That's also, on a long enough timeline, the entire history of human inquiry into the unknown. The stubborn, beautiful, occasionally catastrophic decision to keep swimming toward whatever we haven't understood yet, because the alternative is standing on the shore watching the water and wondering. The water, for its part, doesn't wonder back. It just waits.